What's up, ladies and gentlemen? I'm back with a new segment. We're going to figure out what this is, but it ought to be fun. A frequent guest, Seth Marlowe, who is an alumni or a parent of an alumnus of Praxis, and also someone who I've grown to call a close friend over the past couple years as we've got to know each other. And
Feeling is mutual.
yeah, to learn more about your experience and your point of view. And Seth, we're going to get to the big topic here. You're working on a book, but before we get to that and some of the ideas that we're going to unpack, I want to give you the opportunity to introduce yourself and kind of lay the framework for, hey, why should what you're saying, why should we care what you have to say about the topic that I know you're passionate about, and we'll start there.
God, you start with a really hard question. I'm Seth Marlowe. I live in Charlotte. I've been married almost 30 years. Have two daughters, 25 and 23. My wife just left to play pickleball. That's the new rage, right? Pickleball's the thing. So, to get at a little bit of your question, when my daughters were teenagers, we talked about this on a prior podcast episode with you when Lauren joined. Um, we just made a very intentional decision when they entered their teenage years that we were not going to parent and pressure and press them on the same things that it felt like everybody else was.
Yeah.
So I'll just say that, and then we felt like we had a good reason for that. We felt like we knew what that would hopefully turn into. The goal is always that you want to create thriving young adults. Like, that's your job. You want to take a teenager and have them turn into a thriving young adult. And now they're 23 and 25, and just in hanging out with them for the last, especially 6 months to a year, if they've really kind of come into their own, it just motivated me to, I'm just so impressed with how happy they are and what they're doing, and they're making things happen. And the more time I've spent with them recently, the more I came away with, I think more parents should consider some alternative ways of what they stress as being important to their teenagers. I do not have all the answers at all.
Yeah.
But I think what we have definitely seen is just a kind of a path that kids are put on, and that for maybe one out of every five of their friends, it worked. And for the rest of them, it kind of didn't.
Yeah. Well, 80% failure rate is pretty bad.
Yeah, that's a small sample size, and I may be off on that, but I have asked them a lot over the last few months. So now your friends are 23, 24, 25, 26.
Yeah.
How are they doing? Are they happy? Is their expectations? I think the one of the questions I always ask is what was their expectation of where they would be right now at that age? What's their reality, and which one's bigger?
Yeah.
Right? And I think for the most part, they said a lot of our friends are really struggling with that.
Yeah. Well, you teased a lot, as you kind of laid the groundwork for, hey, here's why I have something to say about this topic. But, what's the 30-second summary? Hey, here's what this book I'm writing is about and what I'm trying to accomplish.
The 30-second summary would be, it's intended for a parent of probably an 11 to 15-year-old, give or
Yep.
take. So it's a kid who hasn't yet been put on this thing I call the path, or they're not so far on it that you feel like a sunk cost.
Yep.
And it's for a parent to say, there's a path that your child is almost certainly on right now. And I want to pose an alternative way to approach that. And potentially that if you consider some alternatives to the path that every kid seems to be placed on these days, you may find that there might be a better outcome when they're in their 20s, because there is a tremendous amount of cost to this path. Soft cost, hard cost, opportunity cost.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, $1 million question here, and I'm curious to hear your response on this for sure. It's like, why are you writing this? Obviously you've got your own experience. There's probably been, like, a lot of these points of view you've developed over, your own lived experience raising daughters, and it's easier now that your daughters are grown adults to look back and say, hey, here's some of the things we did. We think they worked. We at least have reasonable correlation that this approach we took worked. But you don't have kids. Your children are grown, and you've already kind of run the playbook. And so I'm curious why this book is so important to you, and like why sharing your point of view is something that really matters to you, and something that you're taking on as like a personal mission right now and something that you want to do?
I'd say it started mattering many years ago when I every summer for 4 days I would do facilitate leadership training for rising juniors and
Yeah.
seniors. So 7 years, 4 days each year. So in all 28 days. And each time there'd be about 80 to 100 teenagers, 16, 17, give or take. And the agenda, long story short, is really designed to enable them to open up and really kind of talk about what's on their mind as they think about leadership. And so I got really motivated originally just by hearing all these teenagers talk. Their
Yeah.
parents aren't around, they're in a group of people who don't know them, and they speak freely. And I heard the same things over and over again about how really stressed out and anxious they were, how fearful they were. I heard the word fear like 1,000 times. What really motivated me now, a few years after that is as I mentioned, just now that my daughters are right at that age that I really felt like as a parent, I have time to try to guide them. And once they're 23, 24, 25, whatever, like that time's over,
Yeah.
and then it's too late if I feel like I needed to change something. And so really just seeing how much they are thriving and then having them talk about some of the challenges that their friends are having and not thriving, that has become in the last few months, just like I think I need to write this book and
Yeah.
just see if parents of kids that aren't quite on that path yet or early, maybe it helps them. Maybe it prevents those teenagers from sounding like those teenagers I used to sit and listen to. And maybe it turns out that it creates a more thriving 25-year-old.
Yeah. That's awesome. Well, you've certainly taken an unconventional approach, and we'll get into that more, some of the details and specifics of
It's
things.
radical.
Yeah.
It's so radical.
We'll get into that, but you know, uh, there's a couple thoughts I've had and questions I've wanted to ask you about, especially where you're at now, where you've begun to see some of the longer term fruits of investments that you made in a period of time where I would say there was a lot of uncertainty about whether, hey, we're going to do something different.
Yep.
Were there ever times where, you and your wife are sitting up late at night and you're like, are we doing the right thing? Is this a big risk? What if this doesn't work out? Like all of those sort of emotions and conversations and intrusive thoughts that likely, came about, even without the critics on the outside. Like I want to hear sort of what your journey, on that.
Oh my gosh, yeah. I mean, you're a brand new dad, so you're getting
Yeah.
ready to live through this. But oh my gosh, I mean, I couldn't count the number of times that you feel that way as a parent. And yeah, certainly as girls get into teenage years, I mean, it's difficult. I mean, it's difficult for boys and girls, but it is just so hard to be a teenage girl. It
Mm.
really is. So absolutely. I mean, I think especially with our youngest daughter at the age of 19 was just lost, honestly. Really didn't have much of any direction. Um, and really put it together. Really suddenly kind of clicked in the last 4 years. It's just all come together for her, and she's led it and drove it. Our oldest daughter was different. She's more driven. She knew exactly what she was going to do after high school when not going to college. So they were just different, but absolutely so many times along the way, you're going like I think I'm doing the right things, but am I absolutely screwing my kid up by doing this? Yes, I had that thought 100 times, 1,000 times. I don't even know how many.
Yeah, I'm sure you did. I'm sure you did. I'm especially curious now, like stage of life you're in, stage of career you're in. Your daughters are adults. Like, why now? Um, why now? Like at this point in your life, this point in your career, stepping out, and maybe you've always kind of had a target painted on your back a little bit by doing something different.
Mm,
But I'm curious, like there is a cost to, and I'm as familiar as anybody with this. Like there's a cost to sounding the alarm that the like traditional path is not right, or that they're at least, it's not all that it's cracked up to be. And
yep.
there's an inherent social risk to speaking your mind, and let alone like doing something as profound as writing a book where you're sitting down and you're concentrating all of your ideas that are in, not somewhat direct opposition to the mainstream path that kids are
Mhm.
put on from a very young age. Like, why now, and how do you feel about, like dealing with putting yourself like in the target zone of like critics and people that they view the traditional path in a somewhat like almost with religious zealotry in many cases. Like,
Mhm.
I just want to get your take on that.
I think, why now is really just, as I mentioned, it's just been now that they're at the age they're at and they've really kind of reached a point. It just became, well, like, and I tend to write long Facebook post rants about every 2 months. I get in a mood and I write a post. And I honestly, I had at a holiday party that we went to in December, I don't even like 4, 5, 6 people come up and say, I love your Facebook post. Oh, you should write a book. Like, so honestly, that was December. We drove home from that holiday party and I was like, I keep having people tell me I should write a book. Maybe I should. But I just dropped it, right? So that was a little bit timing wise. The age of the girls is a little bit timing wise. The girls are grown and gone. I have time now.
Yep.
I have time on my hands. I'll write when you and I are done today. Right now, I'll write for a couple hours because my wife's playing pickleball. She's off doing her thing, and I'll do that. So I have time to do it. In terms of like putting a target on my back or what have you, it's funny. My oldest daughter and I were talking about that today. I called her this morning, talked to her for a while, and I just said I have absolutely no expectations in writing this book. I've decided I'll finish it. I started out saying I'm going to write a little bit and see how it goes. I have decided I'll finish it. I told her if not a single person buys it, it's fine. I don't care. It's okay. If it makes a lot of money, great. Like if it turns into something else, great. But I have absolutely no expectations. And I mean, honestly, I've had a target on my back for a while because for about 6 years, as the oldest one went through high school and the youngest one came through, I got asked 1,000 times, like, what, like, oh, she's 16, so where is she looking at colleges? Well, she's not going to go to college. Why not? Because we decided there's
Those
a
are
better
fighting
path.
words.
Why would why would you do that? Yeah, I mean, our oldest one had the principal of the school called her in her office and said, like, I really want to impress on you that I think you're being misguided and you're going to waste your potential if you don't go to college. So I mean, we've dealt with that for so long
Oh my gosh.
that writing a book about it isn't a big deal.
Yeah. I'm I'm sure when your daughter came home and told you that as a dad, like, you were just tickled.
We were laughing.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, yeah. I mean, we were laughing. I mean, but we heard that all the time. I mean, either maybe somebody doesn't say it, but it's kind of the look you get, like a, well, that's a totally wrong decision, and you're
Yep.
probably screwing your kid up. But I guess it's your life. Like I guess it's your life. I mean, in family. I mean, we had a lot of family. My mom's a high school math teacher. Was a high school math teacher. My mom was very much against it. My
Yep.
mom really got into me a lot about this sort of like, why are you devaluing education, et cetera, which I
Yep.
know we'll get to some, it's not necessarily devaluing education, blah, blah, blah. But yeah, so I had a target on my back for a while.
Here's a stray thought. As you were talking, this just occurred to me, and I'm a new dad, so I'm experiencing a lot of this stuff for the first time. And I got my girl dad hat on, so we're bonding
There
over
you go.
that.
Yeah.
But
I'm a grizzled veteran. Yeah, I'm a
yeah,
grizzled
you're
veteran.
you're a grizzled veteran, and this is where I want to get your honest uh, 25 years of experience insights here. Is why do you feel what do you feel like compels other people um, to feel like they have an obligation or a need to tell other parents how to raise their kids, or to take like such
Hmm.
a vested interest anytime someone they encounter a young adult that's not on the path that they want for their life, even if they're not their parent? Like, what is it that spurs that?
Hmm. That's a good question. I'm not sure how to answer that question. I guess I would say when you're a parent, I don't know that I feel like I felt that or observed that as much when the girls were 8 or 9 or 10,
Yeah.
unless you're the parent with the kid who is always causing all the problems at the get together, right? The undisciplined kid, the loud kid, the bully kid.
Yep.
Like then people might say, hey, you need to. But I mean, both of our girls were just kind of regular people. It ramps a lot in teenage years, and it ramps in high school because that's all parents talk about. I just felt like every conversation that parents have once their kids are in high school, it's about school, how they're doing in school, what achievements they had, where they're going to college, what they're looking at. It just is such this path thing, right? It's just that every conversation, if you have kids and I have kids and they're in high school,
Yep.
that's what we talk about. And so I think it kind of emanates from that. And a lot of parents wouldn't, a lot of parents might say, oh, well, fine. And they wouldn't want to talk about it. But then, yeah, some parents are like, why would you do that? Sort of thing, but not super often.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you feel like, different points as a parent, you ever encountered somebody else who was like, hey, what you're doing is misguided or, not your best interest, whether they were like malicious or friendly or whatever. But did you ever feel like your resolve was challenged or like you went home and you're like, I just don't like
Mm-mm.
that rattled me? Or do you like what was it that gave you such a strong sense of confidence that like, hey, this is what we're doing and I know this is right, even if like this is the path everybody says, like I'm so committed that this is the right thing.
No, I mean, and it's part of the reason to write the book. I mean,
Yeah.
what I've written so far early on is actually the first part of the book is just little snippets going all the way back to when I was a kid,
Yep.
and what my mom instilled. And my mom was an educator. She was a high school math teacher. My mom highly valued education. My mom grew up extremely poor and credited her master's degree with basically being the reason she pulled herself out of poverty. I mean, she was very much into that. And just all the way through my life, I mean, I got fired from 2 jobs. Like my daughter had cancer. I mean, just a number of life experiences that by the time they were teenagers, I was extremely convicted.
Yep.
And that I do not believe in this whole, you have to be excellent at everything so that you can get into a famous college. And then when you get out of college, you have a credential. The world will value that credential. You have unlimited economic success, and following economic success will be happiness.
Yep.
And that's how it works. So here we go. And it just never felt right to me, ever.
Yep. That's good. That's good. I like one more big question, then I want to rewind the clock. You started to go down memory lane for a
God,
second.
you're asking me. These are hard.
And
You said you're going to ask hard questions. I know they're going to be this hard.
When did you, like in this journey, and maybe this is like a handful of different instances, but was there like one big first instance that you can think back to, or some early moments where you can point to and you felt like, man, we did the right thing. This has all been worth it. The approach we've taken is like our daughters are becoming who we knew they could become if we gave them the space and the freedom and the support rather than like boxing them in.
I mean, taking each one of them, the oldest is Lauren. I think what Lauren did after high school is she went through a program called Uncollege.
Yep.
We can talk about that if you want. But, in the first part of Uncollege is she got on a plane by herself and took a 3 connections, 30 hours worth of flying to Indonesia, and then had to make on her own way through a taxi 3 hours to a remote village where she lived and taught English. And FaceTiming with her during those 10 weeks she was there, you could already tell that she was like, this is my jam. Like being able to do things like this. So that we talked about that often, I think. And then with our other daughter, Brooke, it's certainly been more so in the last, like I said, at 19, she was really struggling. And then within a year later, we basically gave her an ultimatum. We made her move out of the house. It's a long story, but her nickname, we called her Pigpen. Her room, her bathroom, everything was disgusting. And we basically made her move out. And the first time we went to her apartment, I was expecting the apartment to be a wreck, and the apartment was immaculate, like immaculately clean. And I'm like, wow, something just changed with her.
Mm-hmm.
And everything in her life just changed from after that. But I so remember that moment when we were driving home. I was like, I could not believe that Brooke's apartment was so clean. Like there was not a crumb anywhere. So those are two that come to mind when you ask me that question.
Yeah, that's awesome. Um, you spurred another question I wanted to ask you too. Is how do you feel like your relationship with your? I mean, my observation is you have a great relationship with both your daughters, and you talk regularly, and you're invested in one another's lives, and it's awesome for me to see as a new dad, as a new girl dad too, to see that, like having that template to look on, I want to ask, like, do you feel like the approach you took with your daughters, um, did it impact your relationship positively, negatively? Were there times where this approach, caused strain, or was it always more positive than negative? Or like, how do you feel like that approach shaped your relationship over time, and especially now today as they're adults?
That's a really good question. Yes, there was an intentional design to the madness, if you will, which is, I think, in the teenage years especially, um, most teenagers did not really talk to their parents.
Mm-hmm.
Most teenagers spent their time trying to hide things from their parents. Um, if they made a mistake, they're afraid to tell them because there's such this societal like you just have to be good at everything,
Yep.
especially once you get in high school because it goes in your permanent record.
Yeah.
So I felt like if I continually pressure my kids, if I set a bunch of rules, they're just going to find ways to break them. Then I punish them, and there's this chasm that's going to develop between us. And so what they're going to do is they're going to ask their 15-year-old friend for advice, and I really want them to ask me for advice or their mom for advice. So a lot of this was some intentional design of, yes, I think they would both probably say that their relationship with me and their relationship with their mom throughout their teenage years in high school was very different from their friends, and that we talked about everything.
Yeah.
When I say everything, I mean everything. Either mistakes they had made. What I always told them is there's a few really big decisions that if you get wrong can be catastrophic. Please talk to us about those kinds of decisions that you're getting ready to face. And then pretty much everything else, if you get it wrong, it's just pretty much fixable.
Yeah.
It's probably going to be fine. And getting them convinced of that. And so I think that attitude enabled them or freed them up to just talk to me.
Yeah.
And so yeah, we're very close.
Yeah. Is there kind of a, off the cuff, like, what are some of those big things that you relayed to them?
Um, the reason we never gave them a curfew. I would say the big thing is we're not going to give you a lot of rules because I think it's really important that you need to learn how and where to push boundaries and make mistakes and make decisions. And again,
Yeah.
you can't make the big ones. You can't get drunk and drive and then kill somebody. That's catastrophically changes your life and it
Yeah.
kills another human being. So we're not really going to have a lot of rules, and instead what we're going to ask is that you communicate with us often.
Yeah.
So that was they would say, like, they remember those conversations. The rules that we're going to have are mainly about being a good human being. Don't lie, right? Don't be irresponsible. Don't be an asshole, right? Just I want you to get the big things right in terms of being a human being, and everything else will kind of just come along.
Yeah.
We did not care what their grades were. So we told them all along, school's compulsory. You have to go. I think every single person that I ever talked to says I hated school. I didn't really like anything I was learning. I wasn't interested in anything I was learning.
Yeah.
And so as I've grown up and become an adult, I know that if I want to learn something and I'm motivated, I'll go learn it. And most of this stuff you don't want to learn right now. So you feeling like your self-worth is based on how well you can absorb and regurgitate information that you don't care about doesn't matter to me.
Yeah.
So instead of studying for 2 hours to get an A on your biology exam, study for an hour, get a B or C, and use the other hour. And I want you to watch a video about emotional intelligence.
Yeah.
I want you to use your time differently versus striving for all of this excellence within the system, because I think it puts you on too narrow of a mindset, and it accumulates over time.
Yeah. You've shared a lot of what you've written with me so far, and even in this conversation and several others you've had, you've used the word thrive. Like, that that was the end point that you were aiming
Mm,
for, is like enabling your daughters to thrive. I'm curious,
for sure.
as you think back to your childhood, your experience with education, your relationship with your own sort of education, and your relationship to, institutions of learning, and sort of um, the path you took through life. Was I want to thrive like the end all be all prize you were aiming for as a kid, trying to make those
Mm.
decisions about your journey, or was it like financial success, or like did your parents set you up and like try and push you down a path towards some other objective? Like, what was it that you were aiming for when you were, on that path early on?
I was super unmotivated and
Yeah.
lazy as a teenager. It's hard when you ask that question. I'm like, what was I aiming towards? And I would say I can't remember
Yeah.
anything. I really do. I was just very lazy. I was a lazy student. I played basketball, but I never stepped foot in a weight room. I never really practiced on the side. Like I just was kind of a lazy, unmotivated kid. Um, I think you and I've talked about this. I finished college and I didn't want to be an adult yet, so I got an MBA. My mom was thrilled, and I didn't have the heart to tell her I'm really just doing this because I don't really know what else to do, and
Yeah.
I'm just buying time. So I think the best I can recall it was I was definitely going to college because my mom insisted on it. I didn't have a I don't want to go to college mindset. That was
Yeah.
fine. That's what everybody else was doing too. Um, so I don't know really what I was aiming for. I guess I just assumed you go to college, you get out, you get a good job.
Yeah.
And then like life starts to happen. You have to be an adult. I really don't remember anything else other than that I was like aiming towards.
Yeah. Yeah. Were there any, like, do you feel like, your point of view today, and sort of as it evolved as you were a parent, like, do you feel like part of it is as strong? I want my kids to thrive. Is that like directly influenced by, your experience as a kid? Do you feel like, I guess what I'm trying to ask is like, as you consider you're a kid, you're going through education, you're unmotivated, and you're thinking about how you want to
Mm.
raise your daughters, like, were there specific things that you can think back to with your parents or teachers you interacted with, or like other role models you had in your life that, like, hey, I'm going to do that differently. I want, this particular way that things were when I was a kid. I felt like that really clipped my wings, or that's not something that was enabling me to thrive. Like, was it that crystal clear, or was it more like, some guesswork and, a couple hunches?
Um, I think, and again, I think you and I talked about this on a prior podcast. I would say when the girls were 6, 7, 8, 9 years old, I don't know that any of this was really in my head. I think we were just kind of raising our kids the way you raise kids then.
Yeah.
A really seminal moment for me was when I read the book, The World is Flat.
Yep.
And that was 2006. So Brooke was 5 and Lauren was 7, whatever. I mean, man, that is probably that book blew me away more than anything. And it's essentially was a book written in 2006 about the combination of globalization and the internet and how it's changing the world. So I don't want to give a book review, but that palpably, like, really, really made me start to go, huh? Like the way I was raised, the path I was put on, my life experience, etc. My kids are not going to be in their 20s for 20 years, but this book just convinced me that like the world they're going to live in and how careers are going to work, how jobs are going to work, how competition is going to work is going to be so different. That's the first time I really started to think, I don't think this path that I put on maybe is going to work
Yeah.
based on what I just read in this book. So it wasn't really a mentor or anything like that. Again, I wouldn't say my parenting style was any different.
Yeah.
I definitely started to think differently after I read that book.
Yeah. I'm curious.
And I had time. They weren't going to be teenagers for what 6, 7, 8 years,
Yeah.
right? It's not like
Yeah.
it flipped overnight. It just started something.
Yeah. I'm curious because I've seen this in my lifetime. I've seen somewhat of a crack in the edifice of the like narrative of how you're supposed to go about your life and education, and it hasn't been like complete shift, but I feel like at least up until I was in my mid 20s and maybe even late 20s, like there was a prevailing point of view, and it was just you were not supposed to question it. And like,
Hmm.
that's within the past decade here. But I'm curious, like, as you think back to where you were, teenager, early 20s, start of your career,
Hmm.
versus fast forward to you having kids, another point in time, your kids are about to graduate high school, fast forward to today. Like, do you feel like what was the prevailing view then about how you're supposed to go about your life? And do you feel like that has changed over time? Um, do you feel like it was still exactly the same when you were making these decisions about, what to, how to raise your daughters in terms of like education or like, I'm just curious to see. I'm curious to get more perspective, I guess, about what the path has been. Like, this is the path people take at different points in your life. That's the path that you were up against when you decided to take a different approach.
Yeah, I mean, I think when I was growing up, well, definitely, right? You probably know the stats, right? I think it's what the percentage of high school graduates who go to college today is higher than it's ever been. So I would say 20, God, I'm so old. You know, when I was a teenager 25 years ago, part of it's that my mom got a job teaching at a private school. And I mean, I was middle class, but my mom taught at a very prestigious private school. And so we got to go for free. So in my little socioeconomic circle in private school, everybody went to college.
Yeah.
We had 89 graduating seniors in our senior class. 89 out of 89 went to
Wow.
college, like seriously.
Wow.
So I don't really know maybe what the messaging was in other areas at that time, right? Other socioeconomic classes, but in my, it was just college. Everybody went to college,
Yeah.
but I think that was less prevalent. To me today, the rhetoric, I shouldn't say that, the you have to go to college and the importance of college and the excelling in the education system has never been more important. Like because the world has changed and because of whatever it feels like, it's actually that pressure hasn't gone down; it's gone up. Um, I tell you, both of my daughters would say they they cannot think of a single person they know that's their age that either didn't go to college or wasn't highly told to go to college. If they didn't go to college,
Wow.
they're estranged from their parents almost. I mean, they're just like, it is amazing. Like, I cannot think of anybody, like everybody. And Lauren was just in Colombia, South America for 2 weeks. And so she met all kinds of people from all kinds of backgrounds. She said, still, literally every person from every single background. It's like it is so, I don't know. I think the pressure, this path that I talk about in the book, the pressure is worse today than it was when
Really?
I was growing up.
That's your experiences. It's like as potent as
To me,
it's ever been.
yeah.
Yeah. That's great.
Yeah, it feels again, it was for me just because I went to this private school with a
Yeah.
bunch of rich kids and they all went to college, but like I had friends at public schools and it didn't feel as big of a deal then. Like I wasn't having guidance counselor meetings all the time. I mean, when my daughters were in high school, it was just rammed down their throat constantly.
Yeah.
It was just constant. Like I said, to the point that she came home and said the principal called me in her office. I'm like, oh my God, and even at high school graduation, I noticed, like on their thing, or their high school, what was, I can't remember what it was, but everybody, it was like, it's your name and, graduating year or whatever, and where you're going to college.
Yeah.
It's assumed. And so if you weren't going, you were like an outcast.
Yeah.
Well, it was either trade school or military, or you're just going to be a
Yeah.
loser. You're the loser kid.
Yeah.
So that I feel like that's gotten worse, but I don't know, right? Because when I was a kid, I was an idiot. So you'll know anything when you're a teenager.
Yeah, no, but I'm just it's curious for me, and I probably like am an outlier just because the work we do at Praxis, like I'm attracting people who are already
Mm,
somewhat receptive to the idea of not going to college. But I think the other data point, and we've talked about this some, is like
I'm here. Flipping a fan on. Hang on.
you're good.
Okay. Sorry.
The other data point I draw on is like maybe it's where I am from, like being from a more of like agricultural blue collar part of the world, northwestern Oklahoma. There's like tons of people who farm, or they're in the oil field, or they're like they're in the trades, and that's like
Hmm.
that's a dominant a dominant, on a like unignorable portion of the workforce where I'm from and the way people like their livelihoods. And then, I mean, there's still people that are, make great money running service businesses and things like that. My dad's a contractor. My grandpa was, electrical contractor. Then but like outside of that, I'm from, again, it's mostly like rural. Outside of that, it's like, if you're not in the trades or in agriculture, the only way to like make it big is to become a doctor, a lawyer, a CPA, or go work for like Edward Jones or like something. There's like this little tiny pocket of like careers. And if you go to college, like that's what you should be aiming for, because those are the only careers. And that's, that's the white collar path. And then everybody else, I guess you could manage a bank or something like that. Or you're
Right.
going to be poor. You're going to go get an education, and you're deciding to be like an underpaid teacher. And it's like, those are the options that I feel like, as a kid in rural Oklahoma, that's the whole buffet of options that you could choose from. And so maybe there wasn't as much pressure to go to college. I certainly felt it because I felt, I was a good student. My mom was a teacher. I was academically inclined, and I love school, like, which is a weird thing to say given what I do today. But it's just interesting, I guess, that you feel like it's stronger than ever. And I feel like there's at least been some, maybe it's some parts of the country, maybe it's differences in socioeconomic class, or like different pockets of different careers where the prevailing narrative has begun to soften some. And I don't think we're anywhere near it being different, but I felt like the pressure has eased a little bit, at least in some circles.
I hope it has. I mean, that's part of the reason I wrote the book, right? I mean, I mentioned going to that leadership conference in the summers. That was 2011 through 2017. Sorry. So, that's 12, between 6 and 12 years ago, whatever that is. So maybe it has changed, but that was through Rotary, and it was intentional that it was designed to have. It was more designed to get lower income people to it who don't have access to leadership training.
Yeah.
So that was what was so compelling to me. Was it was middle class and down, I guess you would say, right? We were really trying to help kids that don't have access to the kind of resources that an upper class kid has. And it was still prevalent amongst all of them. Like, I would say almost all of them felt pressure to go to college, but I would say what's ramped to me is they felt tremendous pressure that by the time they were 18, the college they went to and all that, what are you going to do with your life? You need to figure out what you're going to do with your life. I think they felt tremendous fear about their future because they just didn't know. Like, I don't know. I'm 17 years old. And I think the second thing is they felt, because they did feel like they had to go to college to be successful, air quotes, to like really make, and they're so money driven. I think I don't remember us being as materialistic in the 80s when I was growing up as kids are today. I could be wrong. Like, that might be the old man screaming on his yard to say that. But they were all so money driven. It was all about being able to make money, and that I cannot get a good job and make money without a college degree. But I have to get a college degree from like a college that everybody knows.
Yeah.
And to get into, and those colleges are incredibly competitive. So for me to get where I want to go, I have to be perfect at everything to be picked by a college like that. And they were so worn out.
Yeah.
So stressed out, so anxious. So I think, to me, that rhetoric feels like it's ramped a lot. I don't feel like I remember that when I was a teenager.
Yeah. I don't remember that either. I feel like the emphasis on financial outcomes has been something that's relatively recent development as like this primary
what's
way
that
of
all
keeping
about?
score. I don't know, but maybe it's cost of living, inflation, student debt, but it kind of brings me to an observation I made, and I'm curious just to hear your thoughts on this too. Is I think there are a ton of parents out there who are skeptical. They're path skeptical, and
Mm.
they may have not admitted that publicly to anybody. Like, hey, I really don't know if this thing is the right thing for my kid. That may be out of empathy. I think there's definitely a large group of parents who, maybe they're quietly thinking like, these other parents are a bit crazy the way they're shouting at umpires at sports games and going insane, like pushing their kids. Like there's a
Yeah.
persona parent,
Yeah.
and I think that
That
sometimes
seems like that's got worse too.
that's gotten way worse. Yeah,
That's
but there's
totally got worse.
I think there's some parents that
Oh
are
my gosh.
they're quietly like sitting in the stands. They're looking around and they're like, are we doing the right thing for our kid? And there's sort of this
Mm.
empathetic parent. That's how they arrived at that skepticism, is like out of empathy for their kid. But I think today, back to the point about financial, is I think there's this much bigger subset of parents who are skeptical because they're looking at the cost of college today. They're looking at student debt. They're looking at, maybe they had an older kid that is struggling now and they've got younger kids at home, and they're arriving at this sort of skepticism from a purely financial sense. And I'm just
Yeah.
curious because I feel like yours was never about like, and it's 25 years ago, I guess 7 or 8 years ago when your daughters were college age, but the difference in sort of your motives for choosing a different path as opposed to like, hey, I'm just trying to make sure I don't have to pay for my kids' college. Because I think that there are parents who that sort of, whether it's good or bad or opinions aside on that, there are parents who that's their take is like, hey, if you want to go, you're going to have to figure it out yourself. I'm not going to foot the bill for that.
Yeah. No, I mean, I've been very blessed and fortunate to have a good career, so our conversations with our daughters were, you are privileged and fortunate enough to be in a family where if you choose to go to college, we can pay for it. So
Yeah.
you're not going to have to take out debt if you go to college. You have that advantage. But what we are going to do is help you understand what that means, because if you choose, because our youngest daughter went to college for a semester, she dropped out after a semester, but she went, and then okay. But if you choose not to go to college, you gain access to that money with our guidance. I'm not just going to, it's not a trust fund. You don't get access to an AT and you can blow it.
Yeah.
We'll help you with how to, but we're going to help you understand what that means. And so they would both absolutely tell anyone that's a game changer. When I actually, like, college is ridiculously expensive. And when I understand what rent and food and living is going to cost and whatever, and how much money that is, and then how much money this is, and I get access to that money instead, and that was a big deal. So it definitely was not to get out of paying for it, because we were going to
Yeah.
allocate and give that money to them to use as they see fit. So, one of them they've each used the money very differently. One of them has mostly invested it and done very well. And the other has bought a car, and she already lives in a house, and she furnished a house, and she's done she started 2 little businesses, right? They've done different things with
Yeah.
it, but it definitely wasn't to avoid cost.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's the spirit of your question or not.
No, I'm just there wasn't really a
Sorry if I
specific
didn't answer it.
aim to the question, and I guess as there's something here that I wanted to unpack, and the way you responded maybe elicited a little bit more clarity here. Is do you feel like because you had the means to pay for college for your daughters, and they weren't staring down that decision as like, okay, I'm going to have to take on all these student debts. I'm going to have my parents support one way or the other. Now couple that with like, hey, if you don't go, you have this fund that you can use for whatever. Like, maybe there's some stipulations, like this opportunity fund, if you will.
Yep.
I'm curious to get your take here. Like, do you feel like that incentivized them to choose not to go to college, or it made that decision something that they could approach much more level-headed, because it's like, I have literally all the options available to me, and I'm going to do what is best for me. Like, I'm curious to get that, because what I think about as a new parent, and this is part of why I started down this conversation is because I think about it as a new parent, and especially being somebody who works in like quasi higher education. I hate 529 savings
Mm-hmm.
plans. I hate all of this like literature that's like you need to earmark this money for this specific thing that your 18-year-old kid is going to do, and if they don't do that specific thing, like they lose the money, and you know
Mm-hmm.
like you have lost control and access to that money the way that you can't like just leverage it for other investments or something like that. And I guess as I've thought about that, I'm like, well, what's the best way to approach this to maximize optionality for my kid, in order for them to thrive, but also for them not to feel like I didn't do any planning to help put them on the right path. So like when they get to that decision, they don't feel like they have to start out from scratch.
Um, yeah, I'll tell you the other thing I told him is I had this very clear conversation with him. Now, if you want to game the system, if you excel in school and you decide you want to go to college or nothing and you get a full ride and I don't have to pay for you to go to college, you still get access to the money.
Mm.
So I don't know that it was really incentivizing them not, because now I get access to this money. And
Yeah.
neither one of them really at the age of 18 was at all, like, I really can't remember at all. They're like, when do I get some of this money? When do I get like that? That wasn't really their deal at all. So, and I also told them, listen, if you weren't as privileged as you are, and you had to take out debt to go to college, I would do everything in my power to talk you out of that. I honestly would. If you decided to do it, I wouldn't stop you, but I would do everything in my power to talk you out
Yeah.
of it, because I think it's just, there's such a better way to spend those 4 years than that. I told him if college were free in the United States, let's say I didn't have to pay for college, so you weren't getting access to some if you'd gone to college, whatever. If college is free, I would really challenge you whether or not you should go. And so those were the conversations we were having. So yeah, again, I don't know if I'm answering the question, but it wasn't really, that wasn't really the incentive.
Yeah.
It was more of a lot of conversations of, okay, so if I don't go to college, mom and dad, okay, well then what would I do instead? Okay, let's talk about that.
Yeah.
What would you do instead? But the conversations earlier in their teenage years at the age of 15, 16, 17 is, if and when you make that decision, all of this pressure and all of this time that you spend trying to be excellent to get into college, it all goes away. And so now you get to spend time on things that are important to you, learning things that are important to you, developing emotional intelligence, doing some of the things that I will argue with you are more important than the structured, what you get from education.
Yeah.
So you get access to all of that time now and all of that development. And then if you don't go to college, what's happened, especially with our younger daughter, is she just got to spend really a couple of years. I mentioned she was lost. She's had this conversation with me. While I'm 19, 20, 21, even though she was living on her own, her living expenses are like nothing, right? You have no expenses. You don't have kids yet.
Yeah.
You don't have a mortgage. And so she was really able to not have to worry yet about getting a big, high paying job. She got to spend a couple of years just working on herself, just kind of figuring out. And she's like, my friends that went to college just really didn't get to do that. That's not really what you do. You spend all of your time doing things or with other people. And she's like, and I'm kind of seeing that now, a little bit of that struggle. And I think that time that I get to just focus on myself has really helped.
Yeah. Man, that's awesome. I like that point of view. I don't think I really set up a good question, but your answer was great nonetheless, and like you offered good takeaways. So let's wrap it up there for today. I know that there's so many other things I want to
Okay.
unpack here, and so if you're listening to this, stay tuned. We'll be back with more, and we're gonna jump in head first again soon to get a little bit more into the meat of the book and sort of the topics that you're attempting to cover here. So stay tuned for more soon.
Yeah, and I'll add one thing before you end the podcast. I think if we do another one, because my daughters they've read what I've written so far, and they're like, you really need to early on, like, so what is this path you're talking about? So I think if you want to get back together and just, what exactly is this thing you're talking about? I think we talked about it some, right? It's educational excellence in college or whatever, but what is that? And again, I think the total cost it's not just the cost of college or the cost of the supplies. It's the opportunity cost. It's
Yeah.
what you can be doing with every hour of your life. What could you be doing if you're not in a classroom? What would you do with that hour? And how does that develop you as a human being and lead to you thriving?
You heard it here first. We'll be back again soon.